The sensors on the Dominion flagship screamed without warning. Commander Vexnari dropped her data tablet and rushed to the main display screen where red lights pulsed in patterns she had never seen before. For 300 cycles, Sector 77 had remained dead and empty. Nothing lived here. Nothing moved through this graveyard of ancient battles where radiation storms made survival impossible. Yet something was out there now, drifting through the void like a ghost refusing to accept its own death. Admiral Catharin arrived on the bridge within minutes. His tall frame cast a long shadow as he studied the readings with eyes that had witnessed countless battles across dozens of star systems. The other officers stepped back to give him space. Nobody spoke. The silence on the bridge felt heavier than the armor plating on the hull. The object was a vessel. Its design was crude and primitive compared to Dominion technology. The hull showed deep scars from micrometeorite impacts and the black marks of radiation burns. It should have fallen apart centuries ago. It should have been nothing more than scattered debris floating in the endless dark. But it held together somehow, and more importantly, it was moving with clear purpose toward the edge of the sector. 12 warships surrounded the strange vessel within the hour. They formed a perfect sphere of weapons and shields, each one capable of destroying a small moon. The commanders of each ship waited for orders, while their crews whispered theories about what they had found. Some said it was an ancient probe from a dead civilization. Others claimed it was a trap left by enemies long forgotten. None of them guessed the truth. The intelligence teams worked through the night to decode the markings on the vessel's hull. The symbols were simple geometric shapes, arranged in patterns that seemed almost random at first glance. But the translation matrix eventually found matches in the oldest archives, records so ancient that most officers did not even know they existed. The computer processed the data 3 times before confirming its results. The word appeared on every screen across the fleet. Human. Admiral Catharin felt his blood turn cold. He remembered the stories his grandfather had told him as a child. Stories of a species that refused to die no matter how many times you killed them. Stories of creatures that looked weak and fragile, but fought with a fury that terrified even the strongest warriors. The humans had been destroyed 2,000 years ago during the Purification Wars. Every record confirmed their complete eradication. Their homeworld had been reduced to ash and glass. Their colonies had been burned from orbit. Nothing should have survived. Yet here was proof floating in the darkness of Sector 77. The High Council received the report and immediately declared a communications blackout. No information about the discovery would leave the fleet until they decided how to handle the situation. The political implications were staggering. The Dominion had built its power on the promise that dangerous species would be eliminated forever. If word spread that humanity had survived, every alliance and treaty would come into question. Trust that had taken centuries to build would crumble overnight. Inside the human vessel, a man named Jack Harper opened his eyes for the first time in 2,000 years. The cryopod released him slowly, pumping warmth back into his frozen limbs while machines monitored his vital signs. His first breath burned like fire in his lungs. His second breath came easier. By the third, he remembered who he was and why he was here. The mission had been simple. Survey the outer reaches of the solar system and search for signs of intelligent life. The journey was supposed to take 20 years, with Jack sleeping through most of it, while the ship's computer handled navigation. He was a scientist, not a pilot. His job was to wake up, collect data, and return home with answers to questions humanity had asked since the first cave paintings showed stars in the night sky. Something had gone wrong. The ship's computer displayed error messages in cascading red text that filled the main screen. Navigation failures. Course corrections. Emergency protocols activated. And at the bottom, a timestamp that made no sense. Jack read it 5 times before accepting what it meant. He had been asleep for over 2,000 years. His hands shook as he moved through the cramped corridors of the survey ship Wanderer. Everything looked the same as the day he left Earth. The coffee mug he had forgotten to wash still sat in the small kitchen area. The photograph of his sister Katie still hung on the wall near his sleeping quarters. But outside the thick observation windows, the stars had shifted into unfamiliar patterns. He was nowhere near home. Then he saw the ship's 12 massive vessels surrounded him in every direction. Their hulls gleamed with technology far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Weapons arrays glowed with barely contained energy. Sensor dishes tracked his every movement. Jack counted the ships twice to make sure his eyes were not playing tricks on him. He was surrounded by an alien fleet, and they did not look friendly. The communication systems crackled with strange signals. Jack activated the translation software and waited while it struggled to process the alien language. Words appeared on his screen in broken fragments: specimen, containment, threat, assessment, eliminate. The meanings were clear enough even without perfect translation. These aliens knew what he was, and they were afraid of him. Jack Harper was a scientist who had dreamed of peaceful contact with other civilizations. He had imagined exchanging knowledge and culture across the vast distances of space. He had never imagined waking up in the middle of a war he did not know had happened. He had no weapons, no defenses, and no way to escape. The only thing he had was his voice and whatever words he could find to explain that he meant no harm. He sat down at the communication console and began working on a message. The translation software could work both ways if he was careful. He would speak slowly and clearly. He would use simple words that any intelligent species could understand. He would introduce himself and ask for the chance to talk before anyone started shooting. Outside, Admiral Kethoran watched the human vessel with growing unease. The creature inside was awake now. The sensors showed movement and energy signatures consistent with life support systems at full operation. 2,000 years of peace were about to end, and nobody knew what would happen next. The ghost had returned from the grave, and the entire galaxy would tremble when they learned the truth. Jack Harper spent the first hour checking every system on the Wanderer twice. The engines were damaged beyond repair. The navigation computer had burned out centuries ago. Life support would last another few weeks at most. He was trapped in a metal coffin surrounded by aliens who clearly wanted him dead. The situation could not have been much worse. He found the emergency rations in the storage compartment and forced himself to eat something. The food tasted like cardboard after 2,000 years in storage, but his body needed fuel. His mind needed time to process what had happened. Earth was gone. Everyone he had ever known was gone. His sister Katie had lived and died and turned to dust while he floated through space in frozen sleep. The weight of that loss pressed down on him like a physical force. But Jack was a scientist. Scientists solved problems. They gathered data and formed hypotheses and tested solutions until something worked. Grief could wait. Survival could not. The alien transmissions continued to flood his communication systems. The translation software improved with each passing hour as it learned the patterns of the alien language. Jack began to understand more of what they were saying. The fleet belonged to something called the Dominion, a vast empire that controlled hundreds of star systems across the galaxy. They had encountered humanity before, and the encounter had not ended well for either side. Jack searched the Wanderer's database for any records of alien contact. Earth had detected signals from deep space before his departure. Strange patterns that suggested intelligent life somewhere among the stars. The government had kept the discovery secret to avoid panic. They had sent survey ships like the Wanderer to investigate. Jack was supposed to be one of many explorers reaching out into the unknown. He never found any records of war. His database contained nothing about battles or invasions or the destruction of Earth. Whatever had happened must have occurred after he left, during those 2,000 years when he slept in frozen darkness. Humanity had reached for the stars and found something that reached back with claws and fire. Aboard the flagship Eternal Vigil, Admiral Kethorn summoned his senior officers to discuss their options. The council demanded a quick resolution. Every hour the human remained alive increased the risk of information leaking to other species. The Dominion had enemies who would love to use this discovery against them. Allies who would question whether the purification wars had truly succeeded. The safest choice was obvious. Destroy the vessel and pretend it never existed. Commander Vexnari listened to the discussion without speaking. She had served during the final campaigns against humanity. She remembered the battles on planets whose names had been erased from official records. The humans had been outnumbered and outgunned from the very beginning. Their technology was primitive. Their ships were slow and fragile. By every measure of military logic, they should have been defeated within months. The war lasted 11 years. Humans did not fight like other species. When their fleets were destroyed, they built new ones from whatever materials they could find. When their planets fell, they retreated to moons and asteroids and continued fighting. When they ran out of weapons, they used their own bodies as bombs, crashing ships into Dominion vessels with crews still aboard. They refused to surrender. They refused to retreat. They kept coming until there was nothing left to come. The cost of victory had been staggering. The Dominion lost more ships and soldiers against humanity than in any other war in their history. Entire battle groups had been wiped out by tactics that made no logical sense. The humans seemed to view death as an acceptable price for even the smallest victory. They terrified the Dominion not because they were strong, but because they simply would not stop. Lieutenant Sereveth worked at her station on the communications deck, monitoring the alien transmissions from the human vessel. She was young by Dominion standards, born long after the purification wars had ended. The stories of humanity were ancient history to her generation, scary tales told to children to make them behave. She had never truly believed that such a species could have existed. Now she watched the data streams from the Wanderer and felt something she did not expect. The human was not sending attack coordinates or weapon signatures. He was not trying to hack their systems or gather intelligence for a counterattack. He was simply trying to say, "Hello." The message appeared on her screen in translated text. "My name is Jack Harper. I am a scientist from Earth. I mean you no harm. Please respond." Sereveth read the words 3 times. She looked around the communications deck at her fellow officers, all of them busy with their own tasks. Nobody else had noticed the message yet. Protocol demanded that she report it immediately to Commander Vexnari. Protocol demanded that she treat any communication from the human as a potential threat. But the words on her screen did not look like a threat. They looked like someone lost and alone, reaching out for any connection in the vast emptiness of space. They looked like something she might have written herself if she had awakened surrounded by enemies, with no hope of rescue. Jack waited by the communication console for a response that did not come. Minutes stretched into hours. The alien fleet maintained its position around him, weapons still charged and ready. He wondered if his message had even reached them. He wondered if they understood his words or dismissed them as meaningless noise. He wondered if they would simply destroy him without ever trying to communicate. The fear was constant, but Jack refused to let it control him. His father had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was doing what needed to be done despite the fear. Right now, what needed to be done was to keep trying. Keep sending messages. Keep looking for any sign that these aliens might be willing to listen before they decided to shoot. He recorded another message and sent it on every frequency the Wanderer could reach. He explained who he was and where he came from. He described the mission that had brought him to space. He talked about Earth and its blue oceans and green forests and the billions of people who had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. He spoke of peace and curiosity and the hope that different species could learn from each other instead of destroying each other. The messages scattered into the void like seeds thrown on barren ground. Jack did not know if any of them would take root, but he kept planning them anyway, because giving up was not something humans did very well. The fleet could destroy him whenever they wanted. Until that moment came, he would keep trying to change their minds. On the communications deck of the Eternal Vigil, Lieutenant Sereveth made a decision that would alter the course of history. She opened a private channel to the human vessel without authorization and typed a response to his desperate messages. Her scales shifted nervously as she sent the words into space.human Jack Harper. "Why are you here?" Jack stared at the screen as the translated words appeared before him. Someone had answered. After hours of silence and fear, someone in the alien fleet had reached out. His hands trembled as he typed his response, choosing each word with desperate care. "I was looking for life among the stars. I did not know anyone was looking back." The reply came faster this time. The voice on the other end identified herself as Lieutenant Seravoth. She explained that she was taking a great risk by communicating with him. Her superiors had not authorized this contact. If they discovered what she was doing, she would face severe punishment. But she needed to understand. She needed to know why a human had appeared in the middle of space after 2,000 years of silence. Jack told her everything. He explained about the survey mission and the cryogenic sleep that was only supposed to last 20 years. He described waking up to find his ship damaged and his navigation systems destroyed. He admitted that he had no idea what had happened to Earth, or why the Dominion seemed so afraid of a single unarmed scientist in a broken vessel. Sereveth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she began to tell him about the war. The Dominion had discovered humanity 3,000 years ago during routine expansion into a remote arm of the galaxy. The first contact had been peaceful. Human civilization was young and curious, eager to learn from the older species they had encountered. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. Everything seemed promising. Then the humans started spreading. They colonized worlds at a rate that alarmed the Dominion Council. They built ships and stations and outposts faster than any species in recorded history. Their population grew exponentially, while other civilizations maintained stable numbers. Within a few centuries, humans had claimed more territory than species that had existed for millions of years. The Dominion began to view them not as partners, but as a threat. The war began over a disputed plan and a system that no longer existed. Both sides claimed the world as their own. Diplomatic negotiations failed. A Dominion patrol destroyed a human colony ship. Humanity responded by attacking 3 Dominion outposts. The violence spread like fire across dry grass until the entire galaxy burned with conflict. Jack listened to the history of his own species with growing horror. He had been born on a peaceful Earth where the greatest concerns were climate change and political disagreements. He had never imagined that humanity would become a force that terrified an entire galactic civilization. The people he remembered were scientists and artists and farmers, not warriors who crashed ships into their enemies with suicidal determination. But that was what they had become. Sereveth described battles where human crews fought to the last person against overwhelming odds. She told him about weapons that humans had invented specifically to cause maximum destruction, even at the cost of their own lives. She explained how human prisoners would often kill themselves rather than provide information to their captors. The Dominion had never encountered such ferocity in any other species. Admiral Catharan remembered those days with a clarity that time could not erase. He had been young during the final years of the war, serving on a supply vessel far from the front lines. Even from that distance, the reports had reached him. Stories of entire battle groups vanishing without a trace. Tales of human soldiers who kept fighting after wounds that should have killed them instantly. Rumors of secret weapons that could destroy planets in a single blast. The humans had lost the war. They had always been going to lose. Their numbers were too small, and their technology too primitive to defeat the combined might of the Dominion. But they had made the Dominion bleed for every victory. They had turned the war into a nightmare that haunted veterans for generations afterward. When the final human world fell, there had been no celebration, only exhausted relief that it was finally over. Now one of them had returned. A single human in a broken ship, claiming to be a peaceful scientist who knew nothing about the war. Catharan wanted to believe it was a trick, some elaborate deception designed to lower their guard before a hidden attack. But his instincts told him otherwise. The fear in the human's messages was real. The confusion was genuine. This creature truly did not know what his species had done or what the Dominion had done in response. Saraveth continued her unauthorized communication for 3 days. She asked Jack about everything. His childhood on Earth, his education at something called a university, the music and art that humans had created during their brief existence. She wanted to understand how a species capable of such terrible violence could also have produced such beauty. Jack answered every question as honestly as he could. He told her about his parents who had run a small farm in a place called Minnesota. He described his sister Katie, who had wanted to be a doctor and help people in poor countries. He talked about the night sky above his family's land, how the stars had seemed so close and so full of possibility. He painted a picture of humanity that had nothing to do with war or destruction. The picture confused Saraveth. The humans in her history books were monsters, relentless killing machines that had nearly brought the Dominion to its knees. But the human on her screen seemed kind and thoughtful and desperately sad. He grieved for a world he would never see again and people who had died before most stars in the sky had formed. Commander Vexnari discovered the unauthorized communications on the 4th day. She reviewed the transcripts in her private quarters, reading every word that had passed between the young lieutenant and the human survivor. Protocol demanded immediate punishment. The lieutenant had violated direct orders and potentially compromised fleet security. But Vexnari did not summon the guards. Instead, she sat in the darkness of her quarters and remembered her own experiences during the war. She remembered a human prisoner who had been captured during a ground assault. The creature had been wounded and exhausted, barely able to stand. But when Vexnari had offered water, the human had smiled and said, "Thank you." 2 words that made no sense from an enemy who should have wanted nothing more than her death. She had killed the prisoner the next day as orders demanded. But that smile had stayed with her for 2,000 years. Now another human was offering words of peace from a ship that could not fight back. History seemed to be repeating itself. And Vexnari found herself wondering if the outcome might be different this time. She opened a channel to Admiral Catharan and requested permission to board the human vessel. The Admiral hesitated for a long moment before granting her request. Whatever happened next would change everything. The only question was whether the change would bring peace or more war. The shuttle approached the Wanderer with weapons powered down, but shields at full strength. Jack watched it through the observation window, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped animal. This was the moment that would decide everything. Either the aliens would talk to him, or they would kill him. There was no middle ground left. Commander Vexnari stepped onto the human vessel with 2 armed guards behind her. The interior was cramped and primitive, filled with ancient technology that belonged in a museum. The walls were covered with writing she could not read and images of landscapes that no longer existed. The air smelled strange, a combination of recycled oxygen and something organic that she could not identify. Jack stood in the cargo bay waiting for them. He was smaller than she expected, barely reaching her shoulder. His skin was pale and soft, without scales or protective plating. His eyes were wide and bright, showing every emotion that passed through his mind. Fear dominated, but there was something else underneath. Determination, perhaps, or the stubborn refusal to surrender that had made his species so dangerous that the guards raised their weapons as Vexnari approached. She waved them down with a sharp gesture. If this human wanted to attack, he could have done so the moment the airlock opened. Instead, he stood with his hands visible and his posture open, trying to show that he meant no threat. Jack spoke first. His voice was quiet but steady. "I know what happened. I found the records in your transmissions. I know what my people did during the war. I know what your people did to end it." Vexnari felt her scales shift color involuntarily. She had expected many things from this encounter: defiance, anger, perhaps even violence. She had not expected this calm acknowledgement of crimes committed by a species the human had never truly known. Jack continued without waiting for a response. "I cannot change history. I cannot bring back the dead on either side. But I am not a soldier. I am a scientist who fell asleep dreaming of discovery and woke up in a nightmare. All I am asking for is a chance to prove that humanity can be more than your worst." Memories of us. The words hung in the recycled air between them. Vexnari studied the human's face, looking for any sign of deception. She found none. The creature before her was exactly what he claimed to be: a survivor from a dead world, trying to make sense of a universe that had moved on without him. She holstered her weapon and dismissed the guards with a gesture. They retreated to the airlock but did not leave the ship entirely. Their eyes remained fixed on the human, ready to act at the first sign of trouble. "Tell me about your world," Vexnari said. "Tell me about the people you remember." Jack talked for hours. He described his childhood on the farm, where his parents had grown crops using techniques passed down through generations. He told her about the small school where he learned to read and write and ask questions about how the universe worked. He explained how he had become fascinated with the stars and spent years studying them at institutions dedicated to expanding human knowledge. He spoke of his sister Katie with particular tenderness. She had been younger than him by 3 years, always following him around and asking why everything was the way it was. She had inherited their mother's kindness and their father's stubbornness. The last time Jack had seen her, she had hugged him at the launch facility and made him promise to bring back something amazing from his journey among the stars. Vexnari listened without interrupting. The human painted a picture of his species that matched nothing in the official histories. He described people who loved and laughed and created beauty simply because they could. Musicians who made sounds that moved listeners to tears. Artists who captured moments of light and shadow on flat surfaces. Writers who imagined entire worlds that existed only in the mind. The humans she remembered had been killers. Relentless warriors who turned every defeat into a reason to fight harder. They had used their own children as weapons near the end, sending young ones on suicide missions because there were no adults left to send. The war had revealed the darkest parts of their nature, the capacity for violence that lay beneath their soft skin and bright eyes. But every species had darkness inside them. The Dominion had proven that when they decided to exterminate humanity entirely rather than accept a negotiated peace, they had burned worlds and killed billions because they were afraid of what humans might become. The Purification Wars had revealed the Dominion's own capacity for cruelty, a truth that most citizens preferred to forget. Jack finished talking as the ship's lights dimmed for what passed as night in deep space. His voice had grown hoarse from hours of speaking, and his eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had relived a lifetime of memories in a single conversation. He looked at Vexnari with something like hope in his expression. "What happens now?" he asked. Vexnari did not have an answer. Protocol demanded that she report her findings and recommend the human's termination. The Council wanted this problem to disappear quickly and quietly. One dead human was much easier to explain than a living one who challenged everything the Dominion believed about his species. But she could not shake the image of that other human, the prisoner who had smiled and said thank you 2,000 years ago. She had killed him because orders demanded it. She had followed protocol and done her duty. The guilt of that moment had faded over time, buried under layers of justification and forgetfulness. Now it surfaced again, fresh and sharp, demanding attention. She reached for her communicator and opened a channel to Admiral Catharin. Her scales flickered through shades of uncertainty as she composed her words. "Sir, I recommend we delay the elimination order. There is more here than we understood." The Admiral's response took a long time to arrive. When it came, his voice was heavy with the weight of a decision that would echo across centuries. "Bring the human to the eternal vigil. The Council will decide his fate." Jack heard the words through the translator on his wrist. He was not free, but he was not dead either. For now, that was enough. He gathered the few personal items he had carried across 2,000 years and followed Commander Vexnari toward the shuttle that would carry him into the heart of the alien fleet docked behind him. The Wanderer drifted in silence. Its mission had been to find life among the stars. In a way, it had succeeded beyond anything its creators could have imagined. The question now was whether that life would choose to embrace the last human or destroy him like all the others. The council chamber aboard the Eternal Vigil was designed to intimidate. Massive columns rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Holographic displays showed star maps and fleet positions across half the galaxy. Representatives from 12 different species sat in elevated positions around a central platform where the accused would stand to receive judgment. Jack Harper stood on that platform now, feeling very small and very alone. The debate had lasted 6 days. Factions that had not spoken to each other in decades found common cause in their fear of the human. They pointed to the history of the Purification Wars as evidence that no human could ever be trusted. They warned of hidden fleets waiting somewhere in the darkness, ready to resume the conflict that had nearly destroyed the Dominion. They demanded immediate execution as the only sensible response to this unexpected threat. Other voices argued for caution. One scientist in a broken ship posed no military threat worth the political cost of killing him. The galaxy was watching now. Word had leaked despite the communications blackout, spreading through unofficial channels until every major power knew about the human survivor. Executing him would raise questions that the Dominion might not want to answer. Questions about what exactly had happened during the Purification Wars and whether the official histories told the complete truth. Jack stood through all of it without speaking. He had been given no opportunity to defend himself. The council had not asked for his testimony or his perspective. He was not a person to them but a problem to be solved. The only difference between the factions was whether solving the problem meant death or something else. Lieutenant Saraveth watched the proceedings from the observation gallery above the chamber. Her court-martial had been postponed indefinitely as larger concerns took priority. She was not free, but she was not imprisoned either. The ambiguity suited the council, which had no interest in punishing her, while more important matters demanded attention. She had not spoken to Jack since their unauthorized communications ended. The council had forbidden any contact between them. But she watched him now through the gallery windows, studying the way he stood alone on that platform. His posture showed exhaustion and fear, but also something that looked like dignity. He had done nothing wrong except survive, and he refused to act as if survival was a crime. Commander Vexnari presented her findings on the 5th day. She showed the Council the Wanderer's mission logs and the images of Earth before the war. She displayed Jack's personal effects, including photographs of his family and handwritten letters from his sister Katie. She played recordings of their conversations aboard his ship, letting the Council hear his voice describing a humanity that had nothing to do with war. The evidence created confusion among some Council members. They had expected a warrior or a spy. Instead, they found a scientist who grieved for a world he barely remembered, and people who had died before most of them were born. The threat they had feared seemed much smaller when given a face and a name and a history. Admiral Keth Oren requested a private audience with the High Counselor on the 6th day. Nobody knew what was said during that meeting, but when the Admiral emerged, his expression had changed. The weight on his shoulders seemed lighter somehow, as if he had finally put down a burden he had carried for far too long. The Council reconvened that evening for the final vote. Jack stood on the platform again, prepared for whatever judgment they would deliver. He had made peace with the possibility of death during those long days of waiting. The universe had given him 2,000 extra years of existence. Perhaps that was more than any human deserved. The High Counselor rose from her elevated seat and addressed the chamber. Her voice was ancient and powerful, carrying to every corner of the massive room. The human known as Jack Harper is granted provisional asylum within Dominion space. He will remain under observation and subject to restrictions that will be determined in due course. The elimination order is hereby rescinded. Jack felt his legs go weak beneath him. He did not fall, but it was a near thing. The words seemed impossible, a dream that would evaporate the moment he tried to believe in it. But the Council members were rising from their seats and filing out of the chamber. The decision had been made. He was going to live. Saraveth found him later in the quarters they had assigned him aboard the flagship. The room was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out on the stars. Jack sat by that window, staring at the unfamiliar constellations with tears streaming down his face. She did not say anything at first. Words seemed inadequate for what had happened. She simply sat beside him and let the silence speak for both of them. Eventually, Jack found his voice. "I do not understand why they let me live." Saraveth considered the question carefully before answering. "I think they were tired of being afraid. Fear has ruled the Dominion since the war ended. Fear of humans returning. Fear of other species learning the truth. Fear of facing what we did in the name of survival. You gave them a chance to choose something different." Jack looked at her with those strange bright eyes that showed every emotion. "And what did you choose?" She let her scale shift to a calm blue that indicated peace. "I chose to listen when everyone else wanted to destroy. I chose to believe that the future could be different from the past. I chose hope." The words seemed strange coming from an alien mouth, but Jack understood what she meant. Hope was what had kept humanity reaching for the stars in the first place. Hope was what had made him record those messages when surrounded by ships that wanted him dead. Hope was the stubborn refusal to accept that darkness was the only option. He stood and walked to the window, where stars burned across the endless void. Somewhere out there, Earth had existed once. His parents had lived and died on that blue world. His sister had grown old and passed away wondering what had happened to her brother among the stars. Everything he had known was gone, but he was still here. One human in a galaxy that had tried to forget his species ever existed. One voice that could speak of art and music and love instead of war and destruction. One chance to prove that humanity had been more than the Dominion's worst nightmare. "I will do what humans have always done," he said to the reflection in the window. "I will survive. I will learn. And I will try to build something better than what came before. Behind him, Siriveth rose and stood at his side. The stars watched them both with ancient light that had traveled millions of years to reach this moment. The chaos was only beginning. But for the first time in 2,000 years, it was the chaos of hope rather than fear. Somewhere in the distance, the Wanderer still drifted through Sector 77. Its mission was complete now. It had found life among the stars and delivered its passenger to a future that nobody had expected. The signal it had carried across time and space had sparked chaos in the fleet, but chaos was just another word for change. And change, as humans had always known, was the only constant in the universe.